Let me say this bluntly because sugarcoating it helps nobody. XRP holders aren't poor because XRP failed. They're not rich yet because the system isn't finished using it. And that's the truth Charles Hoskinson just dragged into the light. If you are holding XRP right now, hit the like button so I know my holders are watching, because what you're about to hear is going to flip the way you've been thinking about this entire market. Here's the promise, and I don't say this lightly. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why waiting has felt so painful, why price hasn't reflected progress, and why that frustration is actually the clearest signal that something massive is being built behind the scenes. You're going to see how infrastructure phases work, why early participants are always tested, and why the next transition doesn't reward patience slowly, it rewards it violently. And before we go any further, I need you locked in. If you hold even one XRP, like this video and subscribe right away so I know that my viewers are actually watching and ready for this huge update. Because this isn't entertainment. This is preparation. Now listen closely because this is where people get it wrong. Most crypto holders believed buying early meant getting rich early. That's the lie social media sold everyone. That's the lie price charts reinforced during speculative cycles. But Charles Hoskinson didn't mince words. Technology adoption does not pay retail first. Infrastructure gets built quietly. Control gets established silently. Value transfer happens last. And crypto, especially XRP, has been trapped in that middle phase longer than people's emotions can tolerate. Think about what's actually happened. XRP didn't disappear. It didn't get abandoned. It didn't lose relevance. Instead, it went through lawsuits, regulatory pressure, global scrutiny, and non-stop resistance, while still being discussed by banks, payment corridors, and institutions that don't gamble on experiments. That's not failure. That's filtration. That's the system deciding what survives long enough to matter. And this is the part nobody likes to hear. Wealth doesn't show up while systems are being tested. Wealth shows up when systems become unavoidable. Charles basically exposed the psychological trap that most crypto holders are stuck in. They're measuring progress by price, while institutions measure progress by reliability, compliance, scalability, and control. Those two timelines never move together. Ever. Price lags adoption. Price lags regulation. Price lags integration. And when price finally moves, it doesn't ask for permission. It reprices the entire market overnight. This is why so many XRP holders feel stuck. They're emotionally ahead of the system. They're ready for the reward phase while the system is still finalizing the rails. And that mismatch creates doubt. It creates anger. It creates people selling at the exact moment they should be paying attention. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because Charles wasn't talking about XRP specifically. He was talking about crypto as a whole, and XRP just happens to be one of the clearest examples. Early utility assets don't moon first. They get stressed first. They get attacked first. They get regulated first. And they get boring right before they become essential. Let that sink in. Boring is not bad. Boring is dangerous, because it's when people stop watching. Now this is where Justin's story comes in because he represents a lot of you. Justin didn't buy XRP for hype. He bought it because it made sense. Cross-border payments, speed, liquidity, real-world use. But after years of waiting, even Justin started asking the question everyone asks quietly, if this thing is so important, why hasn't it paid yet? And that's the exact moment most people fail. Because the answer isn't that XRP isn't valuable. The answer is that value is being installed before it's priced. Charles exposed the reality that crypto isn't a rebellion anymore. It's an integration. And integrations don't create fireworks until the switch gets flipped. Until then, they create silence. They create delays. They create doubt. They create the perfect environment to shake out the impatient. But here's where it starts to get serious. And this is why this video matters right now. We are approaching the end of the installation phase. Regulation is no longer theoretical. Infrastructure is no longer experimental. Institutions are no longer exploring. They're preparing. Quietly. Strategically. And history shows us something very clear. The biggest wealth transfers happen right after the longest periods of boredom. So if you've been feeling tired, frustrated, uncertain, you're not late. You're being tested. And in Section 2 we're going to break down exactly what Charles Hoskinson exposed, what people misunderstood about his message and why it confirms that crypto, and XRP specifically, is closer to its inflection point than most holders realize. Stay locked in. Because this changes everything. Now listen closely because this is where most people completely misunderstood what Charles Hoskinson was really saying, and that misunderstanding is exactly why so many crypto holders stay frustrated, confused, and impatient. Charles didn't come out and say, XRP is bad, or crypto failed. That's the surface level noise people clipped for clicks. What he actually exposed was something far deeper, far more uncomfortable, and far more important. Crypto holders are judging a system that hasn't reached its monetization phase yet. That's the core of it. Charles was talking about timelines. He was talking about power structures. He was talking about how emerging technologies get absorbed by existing systems before they ever reward the people who supported them early. And if you really heard him, not emotionally but logically, he was describing exactly what XRP holders have been living through for years. Here's the reality he laid bare. Wealth does not flow during experimentation. Wealth flows during deployment. And crypto, whether people like it or not, has been in a prolonged experimentation and integration phase. Not for retail. For governments. For regulators. For banks. For institutions that move slowly, deliberately, and behind closed doors. Charles basically pulled back the curtain and said, you don't get rich just because the tech exists. You get rich when the tech becomes unavoidable. That's a hard pill to swallow when you've been holding through volatility, lawsuits, fear, and endless delays. But it explains everything. Think about XRP specifically. XRP didn't spend the last several years chasing retail hype. It spent that time surviving regulatory pressure, being scrutinized by governments, tested by financial institutions, and forced to operate under a microscope. That process is brutal. It suppresses price. It kills momentum. It makes holders feel forgotten. But it also does something critical. It filters out weak systems and strengthens the ones that can actually operate at global scale. Charles exposed the fact that crypto is no longer a rebellion against the financial system. It's being merged into it. And mergers don't happen loudly. They don't happen on Twitter. They happen in boardrooms, regulatory frameworks, pilot programs, and infrastructure upgrades that most retail investors never see. This is why price action feels disconnected from progress. Retail measures success emotionally. Institutions measure success structurally. They don't care about candles. They care about reliability, compliance, governance, and control. Until those boxes are checked, price is irrelevant to them. And that's where most XRP holders get stuck mentally. They see adoption headlines and expect instant price movement. But Charles made it clear, adoption starts long before monetization. Banks test systems quietly. Governments draft rules slowly. Infrastructure gets stress-tested under pressure. And during all of that, price stays muted on purpose. Volatility is the enemy of system builders. This is where it gets even more revealing. Charles pointed out that most people underestimate how long it takes to integrate new technology into legacy systems, especially systems as massive as global finance. We're not talking about apps or websites. We're talking about trillions of dollars moving through rails that cannot fail. One mistake doesn't cause inconvenience, it causes collapse. So what happens? Everything moves slower than retail wants. Way slower. And XRP sits right in the middle of that storm. Now here's the moment that really matters, and this is where the exposure becomes undeniable. Charles essentially confirmed that the delay is not accidental. Strategic. Systems are stabilized before they are monetized. Control is established before value is released. And once those systems go live at scale, price doesn't climb politely, it reprices violently. That's the part most people miss. And this is where Justin's perspective comes back in. Justin, like many XRP holders, assumed time alone would be enough. Buy early, wait, get rich. But what Charles exposed is that time without understanding leads to frustration. Time with understanding leads to conviction. Because when you understand the phase you're in, waiting doesn't feel like punishment, it feels like positioning. And here's the kicker. This exposure doesn't just apply to XRP. It applies to the entire crypto market. Most tokens never make it past experimentation. They fail quietly. But the ones that survive regulation, institutional scrutiny, and global testing don't disappear. They consolidate power. XRP is one of those survivors. So when Charles says crypto holders aren't rich yet, he's not mocking them. He's warning them. He's saying, you're early to the integration but late to the speculation. And that's the most dangerous emotional zone to be in, because that's where people sell right before systems flip from testing to deployment. And that brings us to the most important question of all. If this is the integration phase, what happens when it ends? That's exactly what we're breaking down in Section 3, the real reason XRP and crypto holders still aren't rich, and why that reason is about to disappear faster than most people expect. Stay with me, because this is where the picture gets very real. Alright, this is the part most people won't like, but it's the part that finally explains everything. The real reason XRP and crypto holders aren't rich yet has nothing to do with patience, belief, diamond hands, or waiting longer. It has everything to do with who controls the switch, and when that switch is allowed to be flipped. Here's the truth nobody tells you. Markets don't reward readiness, they reward necessity. And right now, crypto is ready, but the world hasn't been forced to need it yet. That's the gap. XRP works. Crypto works. Blockchain works. That hasn't been the question for years. The real question has been, when does the legacy system reach a point where it can't function efficiently without these tools? Because until that moment arrives, wealth stays suppressed, intentionally. This is where Charles Hoskinson's message becomes impossible to ignore. He exposed that early crypto adoption wasn't about making retail rich. It was about building parallel infrastructure quietly while the old system still limped along. And as long as the old system can survive, even inefficiently, capital doesn't migrate aggressively. It waits. It watches. It prepares. Now think about XRP specifically. XRP's entire purpose is to fix inefficiencies in global payments, liquidity, and settlement. But as long as banks can tolerate delays, fees, and friction, they don't rush. They test. They pilot. They negotiate. They regulate. And during all of that, price stays flat because urgency hasn't been triggered yet. That's not failure. That's containment. Here's where it gets crazy, and this is the part nobody talks about. Price suppression isn't about manipulation conspiracies. It's about system stability. You don't roll out global financial infrastructure while the underlying asset is wildly volatile. You stabilize first. You regulate first. You control narratives first. Then, and only then, do you allow repricing. That's why XRP has felt like it's been held back. Because in many ways, it has been. Not illegally. Not maliciously. Strategically. And crypto holders misread that as weakness. But Charles essentially confirmed this. The people building the rails don't care about your entry price. They care about reliability. They don't care if retail is bored. They care if systems can handle scale. They don't care about hype. They care about compliance, governance, and control. Now here's where the psychological trap snaps shut. Retail sees no price movement and assumes nothing is happening. Institutions see no price movement and think, good. It's stable. Keep building. Two completely different interpretations of the same reality. This is why so many XRP holders feel exhausted. They've been emotionally investing in a system that hasn't reached its monetization trigger yet. And that's brutal because human patience runs out long before infrastructure cycles do. Justin felt this too. He watched meme coins pump on hype while XRP stayed quiet. He watched narratives rotate while XRP stayed boring. And for a moment, even Justin wondered if he was wrong. But here's the moment that changes everything. Wealth doesn't come when you're right early. It comes when the world catches up late. And that catching up phase is violent. When systems become necessary, not optional, capital doesn't trickle in. It rushes. It floods. It overcorrects. It reprices everything it previously ignored. And that's when the wealth gap explodes between people who understood the delay and people who mistook silence for failure. This is also why most crypto holders never get rich. They don't fail because they bought the wrong asset. They fail because they sell during the most psychologically difficult phase. The phase right before necessity kicks in. The quiet phase. The boring phase. The phase where progress happens without applause. Charles exposed that the crypto market hasn't rewarded holders yet because it hasn't needed to. The moment need replaces experimentation, everything changes. That's when timelines collapse. That's when prices move faster than emotions can process. That's when years of waiting get priced in within weeks or months. And here's the kicker, we are dangerously close to that moment. Regulatory frameworks are locking in. Liquidity stress in the global system is increasing. Cross-border inefficiencies are becoming impossible to ignore. Legacy systems are cracking under modern demand. And once that pressure hits a breaking point, the switch doesn't get flipped slowly. It gets slammed. This is why Section 4 matters more than anything we've talked about so far. Because now we're going to answer the most important question of all. What happens when the integration phase ends and the monetization phase begins? This is where timelines accelerate. This is where narratives flip. This is where people stop asking why hasn't it paid, and start asking, how did we miss this? Stay with me, because what comes next is the part that changes how you see the future of XRP crypto, and your position in this market. Now this is the moment where the entire narrative flips on its head, because once you truly understand what Charles Hoskinson exposed, you can't unsee it. Everything that felt like delay suddenly looks like design. Everything that felt like stagnation starts to look like positioning. And everything that felt unfair begins to look inevitable. Here's why this changes everything going forward. For the first time in crypto's history, we are watching the transition from integration to activation happen in real time. For years, crypto lived in speculation. Then it moved into experimentation. After that came regulation and resistance. But now we're entering the phase where systems don't just exist, they start getting used at scale. And scale changes everything. When a technology crosses from possible to necessary, markets don't ask for permission. They reprice violently. That's what Charles was pointing at without screaming it. He was saying, in his own way, that the groundwork is nearly finished. And once that happens, the same patience that felt painful becomes the most valuable asset you own. This is especially true for XRP. XRP isn't waiting for belief. It's waiting for demand. Real demand. Institutional demand. Demand that comes from inefficiency becoming intolerable. From liquidity pressure building in global markets. From cross-border settlement delays becoming a liability instead of an inconvenience. And when that demand hits, it doesn't care how long you waited. It only cares whether you're positioned. Justin finally realized this when he stopped watching the charts and started watching the system. He noticed regulation tightening, not disappearing. He noticed banks preparing instead of posturing. He noticed silence replacing hype, and that's when it clicked. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Silence means decisions are being made where retail can't see them. And once those decisions are finalized, price is the last thing to move, but it moves the fastest. This is why the future doesn't look like the past. The next phase of crypto won't reward memes, noise, or short-term narratives. It will reward infrastructure. It will reward reliability. It will reward assets that survive scrutiny instead of avoiding it. And that puts XRP and crypto as a whole in a completely different category than before. Charles didn't expose failure. He exposed timing. He exposed the truth that wealth transfer doesn't happen during chaos. It happens after order is restored. And we are watching order being restored right now. Slowly, quietly, methodically. That's why this changes everything. Because once the integration phase ends, the market won't ask who was patient. It will simply reward those who were. And that leads us straight into the final section, because understanding this truth creates responsibility. Responsibility to act correctly. Responsibility to stay alert. Responsibility to recognize that moments like this don't last forever. Section 5 is where the warning comes in. This is where we talk about the wealth shift that's coming, and what you do next decides which side of it you're on. This is the part one need you to feel, not just hear. Because what comes next in crypto won't be gentle. It won't be obvious. And it definitely won't wait for consensus. When the switch flips, and it will flip, the wealth transfer happens fast, emotionally, and without mercy for hesitation. Charles Hoskinson didn't expose this to scare people. He exposed it to warn them. He was essentially saying, most people won't be rich from crypto not because they were wrong, but because they misread the moment. And right now, we are standing inside one of those moments. The wealth shift doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with boredom. It begins with silence. It begins with people losing interest. That's how the system shakes out weak conviction. That's how it clears the runway. And once that runway is clear, capital doesn't walk in, it sprints. If you are holding XRP right now, hit the like button so I know my holders are watching. This matters. Because here's the final warning. The most dangerous time to sell is right before necessity arrives. And necessity doesn't announce itself. It shows up as pressure, liquidity stress, regulatory finality, institutional urgency. And when those forces collide, markets don't move in steps, they jump. Justin understands this now. He stopped asking, why hasn't it happened yet? And started asking, what happens if I'm not ready when it does? That's the shift most people never make. They focus on the wait instead of the outcome. They focus on frustration instead of positioning. And that's why most never experience the wealth phase. Because when it finally starts, it doesn't reward emotion. It rewards preparation. This is the last calm before acceleration. The last phase where you can still think clearly. The last window where positioning is quiet instead of crowded. And once it closes fast. So let me say this clearly, not as hype but as reality. Crypto isn't late. XRP isn't failing. You're not crazy for waiting. You're just early to the phase that doesn't feel rewarding yet. But that phase is ending. And if you hold even one XRP, like this video and subscribe right away so I know that my viewers are actually watching and ready for this huge update. Because what comes next will separate those who understood the shift from those who watched it happen. Stay sharp. Stay positioned. And don't let boredom steal what patience is about to deliver.